If you're the kind of person who wants a subwoofer that actually settles in with the rest of your system, gives you that punch you hear in a theater, and won't turn your living room into a vibration testing lab, you're probably staring at a sea of specs and wondering which one will really make a difference. The worry is real. You could spend a chunk of cash on a model that promises thunder and then end up with a box that either drowns out dialogue or sits quiet in the corner while the rest of the room fights for attention. That's why I spent a few evenings watching movies, listening to a variety of music genres, and digging through forums before I finally tried the definitive technology to send DN12. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. What makes a subwoofer worth its weight in gold isn't the number of what's on the label, it's how that power translates to the room you live in. The DN12 goes about this by pairing two 12-inch radiators with what the company calls a 3XR arc. In plain terms, that design lets the sub produce a deeper low end without needing a massive cabinet. I set it up in a medium-sized family room, about 12 feet by 14 feet, with a 5.1 surround system that already had a decent main speaker pair. The first thing I noticed after the initial calibration was that the bass filled the space evenly. I could hear the rumble of an explosion in a movie without the floor shaking. And in a song like Feel Good Incorporated, the low end felt tight enough that it didn't muddy the mids. That consistency is what most buyers are after, enough presence to feel immersive, but not so much that you lose detail. Who should consider the DN12? If you already own or plan to buy a home theater setup that leans toward the higher end, think quality bookshelf or floor-standing speakers, and you want a sub that can keep up without demanding a dedicated subroom, this could be a good match. The intelligent phase control does a decent job of aligning the sub's output with your main speakers, which helps avoid the classic boom-boom-hush effect when the bass and the main drivers are out of sync. That's especially helpful for those who have a mix of seated and standing listeners. It also means you won't need to spend a lot of time digging into phase settings. The unit pretty much does the heavy lifting itself. On the flip side, if you're a budget-driven buyer who's comfortable with a single 10-inch sub or you already have a sealed cabinet that fits under a couch, the DN12 might feel like overkill. Its 1500-watt peak Class H amplifier is certainly powerful, but in a smaller apartment that doesn't have the acoustic space to develop a big, room-filling bass, you may never see the full benefit. In my own tests, the sub's low-pass filter was easy to adjust via the built-in knob, but the range was limited. There's only so much tweaking you can do before you hit the ceiling of what the enclosure can deliver. If you need a sub that can be finely tuned to a very specific crossover point for critical listening, you might look at models that offer more granular digital controls. The practicality of the DN12 shines when you think about daily use. The front-facing controls for volume, low-pass filter, and phase mean you don't have to fire up a separate app or remote to make adjustments when you're watching a late-night movie or swapping to a live concert DVD. I found myself turning the volume knob up a notch for an action blockbuster, then dialing it back a bit for a jazz performance, all without pausing the content. That little convenience factor adds up, especially if your family uses the system for everything from kids' cartoons to late-night gaming sessions. Another real-world consideration is connectivity. The DN12 offers RCA inputs and a line-level LFE, low-frequency effects, input, which means you can hook it up directly to most AV receivers or even a dedicated processor if you have one. I connected it to my receiver's sub-out, and the auto-detect feature correctly identified the sub's presence, letting the receiver handle the crossover. For people who like to keep the wiring tidy, the fact that there's no need for a separate subwoofer amplifier is a time saver. However, keep in mind that the unit doesn't have a wireless option. If you're aiming for a completely cable-free setup, you'll need an external transmitter, which adds cost and potential latency. Hidden trade-offs also matter. The DN12's dual radiator design does a good job of flattening the response across the room, but the cabinet is taller than many seal box subs. In my setup, I had to place it on a dedicated stand because the height made it awkward to tuck under a piece of furniture. If you have limited floor space or a low ceiling, that could be a logistical hurdle. Additionally, while the sub's power handling is high, the internal dampening is tuned for a balanced sound rather than extreme SPL, sound pressure level. So,